But what you have is a certain group of people, litigants and on whatever side, who their attitude is, well, the people who likely seem negligent have no money. And the people who have money are not negligent. But we're not going to let that stop us from doing what we need to do in terms of litigation. So we have people that are suing people that they think are deep pockets litigants, where they're going to be able to, well, why sue people if you're not going to get money? That's what you're doing.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. ALEC Baldwin appeared on stage yesterday, Sunday, as a special guest at the Boulder International Film Festival. He used the opportunity to address his position on the Rush shooting. Interestingly, Fox News attempted to cover the event directly and in person, but were turned away. So some of the best photos we've got from that event are from the Boulder Daily Camera. Apparently, Baldwin's own representatives intervened so that press credentials were withheld. That's certainly in terms of Fox News. I was wondering whether there would be a dramatic showdown in Boulder, even booing, especially given the negative reactions when Baldwin's appearance at the festival was first revealed on Twitter about a month ago. Deadline summed up Baldwin's appearance in Boulder by saying, quote, "ALEC Baldwin claims the wrong people are being charged in lawsuits related to the fatal shooting of Elena Hutchins on the Rust film set." And I guess you could take from that what he means is, I'm the wrong person. You shouldn't be targeting me. You should be targeting someone else. In other words, he's shifting blame, shifting responsibility to someone else. CNN was a little bit more blunt in their assessment of Baldwin's statement, saying, quote, "Rust lawsuits are going after rich people." And of course, that's once again referring to himself. But before we go through the entirety of Baldwin's statement on the Rust incident at the Boulder Film Festival, step by step, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do like, share, leave a comment, and let's get started.
Someone whose job is to ensure the safety of a weapon hands someone else whose job is to be the secondary layer of protection for safety of a weapon. And they hand you that weapon and you declare that that weapon is safe. That's how I've done it my whole life. But all my career, without incident, I've relied on the safety experts there to declare the gun is safe. Never had a problem. And this happened. And of course, this is, to me, sometimes it's so surreal.
So it is quite interesting trying to get the script to what Baldwin said. If you go to CNN, there are a couple of clips of him speaking where you can actually see him speaking, but then there are also clips where there's only audio. And so it's quite interesting just how the statement that he does make there is sort of fragmented. And it kind of gives you the impression that even the news media struggled to actually get this information. Now, according to Fox News, quote, Baldwin spoke about how there were two victims, while also seemingly suggesting that there are some people who have filed suits who are, quote unquote, financially motivated and going after, again, quoting, deep pocket litigants. And that is according to what they found from the Hollywood Reporter. Now, I think the two victims aspect refers to this idea that two people were injured and that no one else is really affected. That's an oversimplification. As a result of the incident, the entire movie was closed down, and essentially 90 to 100 people instantly lost their jobs, as also the subject of 5 lawsuits. I think it's also a counter to the lawsuits claiming injury of some kind in Serge Fetnoy's case, the gaffer, for sustaining powder burns, and in Mamie Mitchell's case for being psychologically traumatized. But this is the exact quote. These are the exact words, according to THR, that Baldwin said. That's the Hollywood Reporter. Quote, "From the beginning, from the moment this happened, everybody is put out. Besides all the anguish and the suffering, horrible feelings we have. And of course, there are two victims and nobody else is a victim, so to speak. We have dealt with a situation where specific people are not as interested in finding out what really happened." So it's almost like he's saying, in terms of these lawsuits, they're not actually trying to find out what happened. They're just really trying to go after the money. I think Baldwin has a point that only 2 people were physically injured during the incident, but there were also other accidental discharges and injuries on the set. Someone was injured by, I think, a bathroom sink, and a medic had to sort of assist them. I'm not sure if Sarah Zachary injured herself when she shot a blank round accidentally into her foot. This was a few days before the incident. But I do think the 2 victims narrative is simplistic. What about Helena's family? They're victims too. And was Helena's name ever mentioned once during this part of the discussion?
This woman was a lovely woman. She was a lovely woman. And she was talented. I was involved in a situation where somebody was killed.
Was Helena's name ever mentioned once during this discussion? So it feels like she's being minimized along with the overall responsibility. I think there's some substance to Baldwin referring to deep pocket litigants being targeted, meaning himself. I think it's also quite a clever way to avoid saying rich and appearing conceited. He's not saying, I'm rich, and so that is why they're targeting me. I don't think Baldwin wants to appear conceited in front of this crowd, but to be accurate, in the 5 lawsuits, Hannah Gutierrez Reed and Dave Halls have been sued by a medic, and they're not wealthy. And Hannah in turn has been sued she has sued a rickety prop company, the ammunition supplier, for negligence. I'd hardly describe the targets of either of those lawsuits as deep pocket litigants. So I think it's a bit of a glossing over to say that everything that's happening in terms of the lawsuits is going after him as a deep pocket litigant. That's definitely an oversimplification. In fairness, neither the suits from Svetnoy or Mitchell directly target Baldwin in the sense that he and he alone is the focus of the suit. It's Baldwin and his co-producers as well as the production companies involved. So Baldwin seems to be making some real sweeping statements here that, while technically may be true from a certain perspective, more broadly and more generally, I wouldn't say that they're really accurate. And one has to look at the way Baldwin makes some very broad statements in one area while examining other aspects very minutely, very microscopically and carefully, all the while, as I say, forgetting to mention Alina's name, or for that matter, Joel Souza, the director, or even any name, or even the movie's name. According to Fox News, quote, this is quoting what he said, "What you have is a certain group of litigants on whatever side who their attitude is, well, the people who likely seem negligent have enough money, and the people who have money are not negligent, but we're not going to let that stop us from doing what we need to do in terms of litigation. Why sue people if you're not going to get money? That's what you're doing." End quote. So by inference, Baldwin is declaring himself not negligent. He's saying he's only being sued because he has money. I think it would be naive to say that Baldwin's $60 million piggy bank isn't a factor and isn't an incentive. But it's also naive to suggest the circumstances surrounding the incident were completely irrelevant, that Baldwin's role in what happened, him actually holding the gun, completely irrelevant. Think about the striking camera crew on the day of the incident, the multiple accidental discharges. Again, the fact that Baldwin was actually holding the gun pointed in the direction of 2 crew members when it magically went off by itself. So going back to what he said, he apparently asked attendees to think of all the billions of rounds of ammunition that were fired on movie and TV sets in the last 75 years. So now he's taking it really global, and it's similar to something he said on ABC News on the 3rd of December. He talks about billions of rounds on movie and TV sets over 75 years and says only 4 people have died. And then he compares that to the opioid industry, the airline industry, the automobile industry, the gun industry itself, right? Now, once again, this is minimizing. He seems to be saying, move on, there's nothing to see here, go and look at these other industries. I think a proper comparison would be to compare the statistics of accidental deaths due to gunshot injuries in America. According to a peer-reviewed study published in 2019. They estimated this was dealing with, I think, facts and stats up till 2015. So it's relatively dated. It was published 3 years ago in 2019, but referring to stats from 2015. And they said then that we estimate that 430 unintentional firearm fatalities in the United States were taking place per year. That's way more than one every single day in America. The rate is highest, according to this report, for older children to young adults, and the vast majority of the victims are male. Common circumstances include playing with a gun, that's over 28% of incidents, thinking the gun was unloaded, 17%, and hunting, 13%. The victim is suspected to have consumed alcohol in nearly a quarter of the deaths, and in almost half of those aged 20 to 30. I also think it's an error in reasoning to argue that in the last 75 years, 4 people have died in gun deaths on TV and in the movies, arguing essentially that because so few have died, we shouldn't really pay attention to it. We should instead pay attention to deaths in other areas. In this case, it wasn't just that Helena was shot and killed, but the director was also badly injured. I doubt that has ever happened in the history of showbiz in America. And that fact, you could also argue that the train incident in terms of the Midnight Run movie, the fact that that hadn't happened before, oh, no, don't pay attention to this. What about the opioid epidemic? The fact is, what happened in that incident was egregious. It was negligent. It was something that wasn't right. And so the fact that it's rare doesn't make those responsible less responsible. The fact that it's rare seems to indicate instead serious flouting of the well-trodden path of safety protocols, doesn't it? Going back to Fox News, they describe Baldwin highlighting now the safety record of the film and television industry, and then he also talks about a chain of command when it comes to handling weapons on set. And he was saying that breaking these protocols is illegal and against the rules. Of course, it's not him who's breaking these protocols, it's somebody else. So there is also a chain of command beyond the handling of weapons on a movie set. There's not just a chain of command with weapons. There's a chain of command beyond the handling of weapons. Who do you think sets and enforces the safety protocols in a production? Who do you think is responsible for crew complaining about safety protocols that aren't being followed? Who do you think hires the crew? And what do you think a movie about Baldwin, starring Baldwin as the lead actor, co-written by him and produced by him, suggests about his involvement just in terms of the production, just in terms of his status in his own movie? Where do you think he stands? Is he at the bottom of the hierarchy or is he at the top? Is he responsible for the production or is he just passively involved in it? Is he a small player or is he a big player? Is he responsible for what happens in the movie except when something goes wrong? According to Fox News, Alec Baldwin said that his career had been without incidents and he'd never had a problem when he relies on the safety experts. Baldwin is clearly blaming the armorer and perhaps the assistant director here in this sort of area. And, Baldwin's career on set may be relatively without incident or completely without incident, but the Rust incident is a serious exception to that. And I think one can say that Baldwin's career outside of movie sets has seen frequent incidents of anger, including about a parking space. And in one confrontation with American Airlines, Baldwin seemed to be reluctant and resistant to follow safety protocols, this time airline safety protocols, even though they apply to everyone else on the plane. This is an inversion of the because I'm rich argument. Baldwin seemed to think that he could play a game on a device in that instance because of his status, that the rules didn't apply to him. So he also went on to say, when at the Boulder International Film Festival, he said, quote, "When someone whose job is to ensure the safety of the weapon," he's referring to Hannah, "hands someone else whose job was to be the secondary layer of protection for safety, that's a reference to halls. And they hand it over to and declare you over, I think it should be handed over to you, but he says, and you declare that that weapon is safe. That's how I've lived my whole life. I've relied on the safety experts there to declare the gun is safe and hand me the gun. Never had a problem. He went on to say, in all likelihood, live weapons will be replaced by computer-generated imagery. I'm not sure if that's the case in low-budget films, though. But it does seem quite clear that doesn't he seem to be blaming Hannah and Halls? He's never had a problem before, so the problem is with these people, isn't it? He goes on to say, the thing to remember is that guns are fired in films because that's what audiences want. But maybe not this crowd, maybe not a festival crowd where you want to watch something that's a little more complicated. But there's a place to modify the safety regulations we have to deal with, and I'm very much looking forward to our decisions. If you think about what he's talking about here, it's very general. He's almost taking the conversation away from Russ, the set. He doesn't really seem to mention any individuals by name whatsoever. And then he says this, that he remembers Helena as loved by people and that she was admired. And then he spoke about how his life has changed. Let's listen in.
It's changed my life just in terms of the function of weapons in films and television, the function of safety procedures, which we're all going to have to address eventually. They will probably, in all likelihood, eliminate nearly all live weapons that shoot rounds, and they'll CGI the explosion and they'll lay in the sound.
So to get the quote in context and the real quote that we sort of want to address, he said, I'm very hopeful when facts come out, we will not be held criminally responsible, but it has changed my life. And I don't mean this in the ordinary sense that I was involved in something or somebody passed. I mean, I was involved in a situation where somebody was killed. It changed my life just in terms of the function of weapons in films and television. End quote. Once again, he doesn't say anybody's name. He even seems to be reluctant to say the word killed, where he says somebody passed. That is also minimizing the effect of Helena's death, the effect that seems to have had on him. To say, going forward, his life will change in terms of how? Well, how weapons will be used going forward. This seems to be a psychological postscript to saying he doesn't feel any guilt. Here he's saying, my life has changed not because of the shock or trauma or remorse he feels, or because of any grief, or because he's lost his friend, because of this person that he knew. Instead, his life's going to change because going forward, it's how guns will be used differently on set. And it's kind of this idea that it's not that his relationship changes to a person, his relationship with guns is now going to change. Well, presumably not by him. I mean, he said he doesn't see himself handling a gun ever. Remember, he said, I can't. In conclusion, I want to say this image below by Getty Images makes me notice almost in the darkness the no parking sign. Do you see it there? There's this idea that Baldwin as a special guest in Boulder is an open forum. It's transparent. It's free to anyone who wishes to attend. But the no parking sign, almost hidden in the dark of the foreground, suggests things may not be as simple as open or as transparent as they seem. And there may be efforts unseen, kind of unspoken, efforts and contrivances to control and influence and redirect the narrative. Just look at the bright golden yellow highlighted Boulder and the swirling blue lines, that sort of sweep and sort of curve, how that draws attention away from the roped off section. And what is that doing? It's holding the public at bay, limiting the access of the public. Food for thought, isn't it? So I'm not going to take it further than that. What I am going to be doing, and something for those interested in this channel and the content on this channel to look out for, because I'm going to be going away in a short while, I won't be on YouTube for a couple of days. I'm going to be ramping up my content on the Morphew case. Instead of doing it once or twice a week, I'm going to be doing it almost every other day. And that also applies to the Van Gogh series. I don't want to leave it hanging in midair, when I leave. So I actually want to conclude the Van Gogh series before I leave. The good news is that the Van Gogh series is now dealing with the actual incident, that shooting. It's also a question of, was that an accidental shooting? Did he shoot himself by accident? Did someone else shoot him by accident? Or something else? So it's kind of analogous to this particular thing. And it's also analogous to the Morphew case to some extent. Like, how do you know when something is murder? How do you know when something is suicide? So look out for an uptick in the volume of these particular episodes on Barry Morphew, the affidavit that we're going to be walking through, as well as the Van Gogh series. And it really does conclude on a very interesting note. You'll be finding out facts that you really didn't know, detailed facts about a crime that happened over 130 years ago. So you might want to pay attention to that. Who knows? I find it fascinating. Some of my members on YouTube and patrons do too. Maybe you will as well. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.